And that, my dear Xeno companions, is precisely why you should never, under any circumstances, challenge a human to a drinking contest, I declared with a grin, lifting my synth beer to my lips and taking a hearty swig. Around the battered table in the dingy spaceport bar, a group of curious aliens watched with varying degrees of intrigue. The Xenthan beside me, a lanky being with skin that shimmered like an iridescent oil slick, blinked its 4 eyes in rapid succession. But Zach, it trilled, voice lilting, I struggle to understand how consuming large quantities of ethanol-based liquids relates to your species' famed resilience and adaptability. I couldn't help but let out a chuckle, a sound somewhere between a snort and a laugh. Oh, my sweet, naive friend, I said, giving the Xenthan's slender arm a light pat. It's not about the booze itself. It's about the challenge, the pure, unyielding stubbornness that makes us say, game on, even when every logical part of our brain is screaming, abort, abort. Across from me, a grick. Imagine a sentient cactus with 6 legs and an impressive, mustache-like cluster of fine, needle-like spines, leaned in, his quills shaking with interest. But surely, he rasped, such irrational behavior would be detrimental to survival. How has your kind not wiped itself out? I raised an eyebrow, taking another sip. Who says we haven't tried? We've come dangerously close, more times than I care to count. But here's the kicker. It's that same reckless nature that saved us more times than we'd like to admit. The Mizari twins to my right, think bipedal mantises with an unhealthy love for neon body paint, chittered excitedly, their antennae twitching in perfect harmony. Oh, they chimed in unison. Is this where you tell us another one of those wild human stories? Couldn't help but smirk. These aliens might not always grasp our unique brand of chaos, but they sure loved hearing about it. Well, since you asked so nicely, I said, leaning back in my chair and kicking my feet up onto the table, let me tell you about the time humanity's collective hold my beard moment saved an entire alien civilization. Every being at the table leaned in, whether they had eyes or some other way of seeing, waiting with anticipation. I cleared my throat, drawing out the moment for effect. Alright, picture this, about 50 Earth years ago. Humanity had just made its way onto the galactic scene, all bright-eyed and full of wonder, like a toddler who'd wandered into a quantum physics lab. It was the year 2173, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Confederation for maybe 5 standard cycles. We were the rookies, still trying to figure out the intricacies of universal translators and getting excited at every new species we met. Now, enter Captain Jane Calamity Callahan, fresh out of the academy, as green as the swamps of Venus. She'd just been handed command of the USS Tenacity, humanity's shining new exploration vessel, the pride and joy of Earth. Her mission, simple enough on paper, to boldly go where no human had ventured before, seek out new life and civilizations, and oh yeah, try not to trigger any intergalactic crises along the way. No pressure, right? Now, Jane Calamity Callahan, and yes, that nickname fit like a glove, had a reputation for being, shall we say, adventurously reckless. She was the kind of person who saw a danger, keep out sign, and treated it as a dare. Her instructors at the academy had alternated between commending her brilliance and losing their minds over her risky antics. So, naturally, the powers that be decided she was the perfect choice to lead humanity's foray into interstellar diplomacy. After all, what could go wrong with a captain who treated safety protocols as suggestions? Her ship, the USS Tenacity, was about to embark on its first major mission, to establish contact with the Sherids, an elusive species renowned for their cutting-edge tech and their general disinterest in anything non-Sherid. They lived on Sherid Prime, a tidally locked planet orbiting a volatile red dwarf star, basically a cosmic hellhole that made Venus look like a 5-star vacation spot. As the Tenacity neared the planet, Calamity Jane stood proudly on the bridge, hands on her hips, that signature glint of mischief in her eyes. All right, crew, she announced, voice brimming with excitement, let's go make first contact. And remember, if anyone asks, we totally meant to do that. Her executive officer, Commander Chun, a man whose patience was legendary, rubbed his temples. Ma'am, maybe we should review the diplomatic protocols again, just in case? Jane waved him off, her grin unfazed. Protocols? Schmokels. We're humans, Chin. We improvise, and improvise they did. As soon as the Tenacity entered orbit around Sherid Prime, they were met with a transmission from the planet's surface. A hologram shimmered to life on the bridge, displaying a Sherid, a creature that looked like a bizarre mix between a floating jellyfish and a decorated Christmas tree, speaking with a voice that sounded like a kazoo being played underwater. Greetings, Earth vessel, the Sherid warbled. Your presence here is unexpected. Our star is undergoing a phase of heightened solar solar activity. It is highly inadvisable for non-shared life forms to remain near our world at this time. Calamity Jane, as subtle as a hammer to the face, flashed a wide grin. Well, howdy, neighbor. We heard you folks were having some trouble with your star. Figured we'd drop by and lend a hand. The Shared's floating appendages rippled, conveying either confusion or mild panic. It was hard to tell. Your offer is unprecedented. However, this situation far exceeds the technological capabilities of your primitive species. We recommend you depart at once. Now, if there's one thing you don't do, it's tell a human they can't do something. Jane's grin morphed into a predatory smirk. Primitive, huh? Jane's grin only grew wider. Well, why don't you sit back and watch what this primitive tech can do? Chun, power up the magnetosphere manipulator. Chen's expression went through the emotional equivalent of a roller coaster. Surprise, disbelief, a touch of despair, and finally settling on reluctant acceptance. "Aye, Captain," he said, his fingers already flying over the controls. "Although, I feel compelled to remind you that the magnetosphere manipulator is still in the experimental phase. It's never been tested on anything close to this scale." Jane gave him a hearty slap on the shoulder. "Well, no time like the present to give it a whirl, right? What's the worst that could happen?" As it turns out, the worst was quite the spectacle. The magnetosphere manipulator, an invention that combined human creativity with equal parts boldness and recklessness, was designed to generate localized magnetic fields. In theory, it could redirect solar radiation from temporary protective barriers and even manipulate objects from a distance. But using it to stabilize the magnetosphere of an entire planet was akin to trying to stop an earthquake with duct tape. The moment the device came online, the tenacity started vibrating violently. Warning lights flashed and klaxons rang out across the bridge. On the view screen, massive arcs of energy began to race through the atmosphere of Shirid Prime. "Captain," Chon said, somehow keeping his voice steady, "I'm detecting some unexpected energy fluctuations." Jane leaned forward, eyes bright with curiosity. "Unexpected in what way?" Chun studied the readouts, eyebrows raised. "If I didn't know better, I'd say we're creating an artificial aurora borealis across the entire planet." And sure enough, Shirid Prime sky was suddenly alive with glowing curtains of light, undulating in shades and colors that defied all known laws of physics. The entire planet was bathed in an otherworldly glow, a light show no human artist could ever replicate. The Shirid hologram reappeared, its tentacles quivering in what was clearly panic. "What insanity is this?" it demanded. "You're destabilizing our entire planetary defense network." Jane, positively beaming with pride, shrugged nonchalantly. "Destabilizing? No, we're upgrading it, free of charge, too." "You're welcome." To everyone's surprise, including Jane's, the magnetosphere manipulator, interacting with Shirid Prime's unique atmosphere, had created an energy shield far stronger than anything the Sharids had ever managed. The incoming solar storm that had been poised to wipe out their civilization, now just a dazzling celestial light display. For a few tense moments, silence fell over the Tenacity's bridge. The crew, the Sharids, even Jane herself seemed frozen, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But instead, the Shirid hologram began shifting colors, cycling through a spectrum of hues before settling on a soft, pulsing blue. This is beyond anything we could have anticipated," the Shirid said, its voice now filled with a kind of wonder. "You have saved our entire species from annihilation, using technology we had dismissed as inferior. How is this possible?" Jane threw her head back and let out a booming laugh. "That, my gelatinous friend, is what we humans like to call a good hold my beard moment." And with that, humanity had officially made its chaotic, audacious mark on the galactic stage. The Sharids, once standoffish and deeply isolationist, now regarded humans with a potent mix of awe and fear, a cocktail of emotions that would become all too familiar to alien civilizations as humanity continued to leave its chaotic mark on the galaxy. I let the tension hang for a moment, taking a leisurely swig from my synth beer and relishing the stunned silence around our table. The Zenthan was the first to snap out of it, its iridescent skin cycling through a dizzying palette of colors. "But that's impossible," it stammered. "The energy alone for such an act would be incomprehensible. And the calculations, the sheer audacity." I flashed a grin, spreading my arms wide. "Welcome to humanity, my friend, where impossible is just another way of saying challenge accepted." The Grix leaned back, his spines rustling like wind-blown leaves. "I begin to see why your species is categorized as a Deathworlder," he mused. "It's not merely your physical endurance, it's your minds. You're all insane, totally certifiable, I agreed cheerfully. But hey, it's worked out pretty well for us so far. The Mazzari twins, ever the eager listeners, were practically vibrating with excitement. Oh, surely that's not the end of the story, they chirped in unison. What happened next? Did the Sherids join the Galactic Confederation? Did Captain Callahan have more adventures? I chuckled and settled back in my chair, savoring the attention. Oh, my dear friends, that was just the beginning. You see, word of Calamity Jane's escapades spread faster than a Ryland stomach virus at an all-you-can-eat buffet. Suddenly, every species in the galaxy wanted a taste of that human hold-my-beer mentality. The Zenthan tilted its head in confusion, its faceted eyes flickering. But why? Surely such reckless behavior would be considered a liability, not a strength. I waggled a finger, grinning. But that's where you're wrong. You're forgetting the key ingredient, results. Sure, our methods are crazier than a Venusian storm ferret with a jetpack, but we get things done. The Grix let out a raspy laugh. Like the infamous Zern action flea circus incident? I groaned, burying my face in my hands. Don't remind me. To this day, I can't even look at a trapeze without getting hives. The Mazzari twins were on the edge of their seats. Wait, we haven't heard this one. You must tell us. I heaved a dramatic sigh but couldn't help the grin spreading across my face. Well, since you insist, picture this. 3 humans, a Zarnaxian high priestess, a broken gravity generator, and enough genetically engineered fleas to infest a small moon, and so the stories rolled on, each one more ridiculous than the last. The Arcturian llama rodeo catastrophe, the disastrous Andromedan cheese heist, the time humanity accidentally created a sentient black hole and had to convince it not to consume the galaxy. Trust me, that last one involved way too much philosophy, quantum supercomputer, and a karaoke machine. Don't ask. As the artificial night cycle deepened in the spaceport, more and more aliens began to gather around our table, drawn in by the tales of human audacity. Each story sparked new incredulity, more laughter, and a growing sense of camaraderie between species. It was one of those rare moments where the vastness of the galaxy felt just a little bit smaller, united in our collective madness and the power of a good story. And that, my friends, is how humans truly make their mark on the universe. One insane, impossible story at a time. A hush fell over the crowd at the mention of the Kronos Cascade conundrum. Even the Dracian void monk, whose rippling shadowed form usually conveyed a serene, detached interest, seemed to pause in its slow drift. The Vul's crystalline surface flickered with refracted light, and the Tsians stilled their rhythmic clicks, their attention fully focused. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment before delivering the next tale. The Kronos Cascade conundrum. Now, that was a true hold-my-beer moment if ever there was one. I shot the Mazzari twins an approving glance. Good call. One of the Mazzari twins chittered with excitement, antennae practically vibrating. Tell them what happened. I chuckled, already planning out how to spin the yarn for maximum effect. Alright, picture this. Chrono Station, a massive research hub orbiting a neutron star. They were studying temporal anomalies, the usual let's mess with time and hope we don't accidentally erase the universe type of thing. Top scientists from across the galaxy, including some humans, were trying to harness the unique temporal energy fields around the star for faster-than-light communication. I paused to let that sink in. Naturally, humans being humans, we couldn't just leave well enough alone. The Zenthan, now a pale green hue, tentatively asked, "You interfered with a time experiment? That sounds incredibly dangerous." That, I said, pointing dramatically, would be the understatement of the millennium. Anyway, everything was going fine until it wasn't. Some genius got the bright idea to increase the energy flow beyond recommended safety levels, just to see what would happen. The next thing anyone knew, time itself started to, cascade. Moments began to repeat, overlap, stretch. Entire sections of the station were thrown into temporal loops. It was chaos. And in the middle of it all was Dr. Emily Stark, one of Earth's finest temporal physicists, and a person with precisely zero patience for anything going wrong. Stark was trapped in a time loop that lasted 5 minutes. She would reset every time, and at first, she did what any brilliant scientist would do. She tried to fix it. But after the 10th loop, when things were still going wrong, she took a different approach. The Grix tilted his prickly head. What did she do? Well, loop after loop, Stark had tried recalibrating the system, running simulations and crunching numbers. But nothing worked. Then, on the 15th loop, instead of trying to fix it, she decided to break it even further. If the machine wants to play fast and loose with time, she said. Then so will I. I let the tension build for a second. So what does she do? She smashes the controls. She disables the entire system with her bare hands, yanks out the core power cells, and then proceeds to hotwire the station's main reactor directly into the temporal matrix. Because why not? The Tsians clacked their mandibles rapidly in what seemed to be shock. That should have destroyed the station. It should have, I agreed. And in a way, it did. But instead of erasing the station from existence, Stark managed to collapse the temporal loops into a single, coherent timeline by forcing the reactor to resonate in sync with the neutron star's temporal signature. The entire station rebooted like a malfunctioning computer, and everything snapped back into place. Time, space, reality, it all stabilized. And that's how she fixed a problem no one thought could be fixed. By breaking it harder, a chorus of astonished murmurs rippled through the group. The Dracian Void Monk's form seemed to shimmer with what I could only guess was admiration. This human approach to problem-solving defies all logic and convention, it intoned. Yet it is effective. Fascinating. I gave a casual shrug, but the grin on my face was anything but modest. Well, you know what they say, if it's broken, break it more until it's fixed. The Mazzari twins buzzed in excitement. Oh, we love that one, but you didn't tell them about the side effect. I raised an eyebrow. Ah yes, the side effect. You see, while Dr. Stark managed to save Chrono Station, there was one small, lingering anomaly. For a full month afterward, every clock within a light-year radius displayed the wrong time, completely out of sync with the rest of the galaxy. They had to recalibrate entire systems because of her solution, but hey, small price to pay for not being stuck in a time loop for eternity, right? The Zenthan's skin shifted to a contemplative turquoise. Your species is truly perplexing. I still do not fully understand how such reckless behavior can lead to such extraordinary outcomes. I leaned in, grinning. That, my friend, is the beauty of being human. We don't need to understand why it works. We just do it, and as the artificial night deepened around us, the stories continued to flow, each one more absurd and improbable than the last. The growing crowd of aliens hanging on every wild, impossible word. The Chronos Cascade Conundrum, I began with a grin, is one of those stories where things start out bad and just get worse, fast. So here's how it went down. It was the year 2256, and humanity had been playing around with time travel for about a decade. You know, little things, hopping forward a few seconds, rewinding by a minute or two. The kind of stuff that made scientists lose their minds in excitement and made the rest of the galaxy uneasy, to put it mildly. Now enter Dr. Lydia Shao, a genius in temporal physics, sure, but also someone with a dangerous mix of curiosity and a complete disregard for consequences. Add to that a penchant for terrible puns and questionable life choices, and you've got yourself a recipe for disaster. Her latest obsession? Figuring out how to make much larger time jumps, years, even centuries. The only problem was, every time she ran a simulation, the results were catastrophic. I'm talking about the entire space-time continuum unraveling like a poorly knit sweater. But to her, that was a minor hiccup. So one night, Dr. Shao finds herself in a dive bar on Mars, wallowing in frustration. She's drinking a concoction that, by all rights, shouldn't have been consumed by anyone with functioning brain cells. 1 part ethanol, 2 parts liquid nitrogen, and 3 parts a very, very bad idea. Anyway, she's listening to a group of alien tourists in the corner having an animated discussion about time travel. One of them, a Zygonian with more tentacles than tact, decides to hold court on the subject. It's impossible, it burbled, dismissing the concept with a wave of a tendril. The energy requirements alone would be insurmountable, not to mention the paradoxes. Your species is simply too primitive to understand the complexities involved. Now, if there's one thing you should never do, it's underestimate the sheer, unholy power of human spite. And, unfortunately for the space-time continuum, this Zygonian had just committed that cardinal sin and challenged a drunk physicist in the process. Dr. Shao slammed her drink down so hard it nearly froze to the table, stood up, wobbling like a newborn giraffe, and announced, "Hold my beer, you overgrown calamari. I'll show you primitive." And just like that, the fate of the universe was put on the line. The next morning, Shao woke up with a hangover that could have taken out a neutron star, but instead of second-guessing her choices, she marched straight into her lab. With her head pounding, she started working on what she would later call the temporal resonance amplifier, but everyone else would come to know as the "oh god" "Oh God, we're all going to die" machine. I paused dramatically, letting the weight of what I just said sink in. The aliens around me were hooked, hanging on every word, their various eyes and sensory organs focused solely on me. "Now, here's the thing about time travel," I continued, "especially when you're jumping by decades or centuries, it gets complicated. You have to account for paradoxes, energy, the fabric of space-time itself." But did that stop Dr. Xiao? Of course not. She was on a mission, fueled by hangover-induced rage and a bet she'd barely remember. She tinkered and toyed until the amplifier was ready. And, as fate would have it, her first test would take place under less than ideal conditions. The Science clicked their mandibles in apprehension. The Dracian void monk's shadowy form flickered, and the Vul emitted a soft, chiming sound. I couldn't resist drawing out the suspense. So, Dr. Xiao activated the machine, and for the briefest moment, everything was fine. Then, I mimicked an explosion with my hands. Reality itself started to shift. Time began to fracture around her lab. One moment, she was standing at her control panel. The next, she was reliving her childhood. Asterisk and asterisk, watching it happen simultaneously from the perspective of her adult self. Entire timelines started to overlap. She saw the rise and fall of civilizations that had never existed, stars that had never formed, and all of it began looping in on itself, collapsing into chaos. The Zenthan blinked all four of its eyes rapidly, its iridescent skin a flickering kaleidoscope of disbelief. How did she survive? I leaned in, lowering my voice for effect. Survive? Oh, she didn't just survive. She fixed it. A chorus of shocked gasps rippled through the group. Dr. Xiao realized that the machine wasn't just messing with time. It was amplifying the natural flow of temporal energy from the universe itself. So, in a moment of sheer brilliance or madness, she rerouted all the energy into the neutron star surrounding the station. The star absorbed the instability, effectively rebalancing time, but not before sending out a massive temporal shockwave that rippled through the galaxy. For a few hours, across the cosmos, clocks ticked backwards, forward, and sideways. But the station and the universe was saved. Barely, the Vul's crystalline body emitted a soft chime, translated as, "That is beyond comprehension." The Dracian void monk drifted closer, its voice a soft whisper on the edges of existence. "It is said that your species dances on the edge of chaos, and yet you do not fall." I chuckled. "Well, that's the thing about humans. We don't mind the chaos. In fact, sometimes we thrive in it," and with that, I drained the last of my synth beer, ready for the next wild tale to begin. Her theory was as brilliantly simple as only ideas dreamt up under the influence of absurd amounts of alcohol can be. Instead of sending people or objects through time, why not move time itself? The device Dr. Xiao cobbled together looked like something H.G. Wells might design if he had a steampunk obsession. Full of brass gears, glowing tubes of exotic matter, and so many blinking lights it could induce seizures in an entire small nation. So when she fired it up for the first time, the outcome was, let's just say it was far from expected. First, everything seemed normal. Then, slowly but surely, people started noticing something strange. Time itself began behaving oddly, stretching like taffy. Minutes dragged on for what felt like hours, while hours zipped by in mere seconds. Cause and effect no longer had a proper relationship. Effects would sometimes occur before their causes. In New Tokyo, cherry blossoms bloomed, withered, and returned to buds all in the span of a single afternoon. In London, Big Ben chimed in complete disarray, creating a symphony that sounded as though time itself was having a breakdown. And then there was Australia, poor Australia. For a brief, terrifying moment, the entire continent found itself back in the Cretaceous period. Kangaroos, as you might imagine, were not happy about that. As the fabric of reality frayed, the rest of the galactic community watched in abject horror. This, they thought, would be the end, not with an explosion, but with humans tinkering with forces far beyond their understanding. But they overlooked one crucial thing about humans. We are exceptionally good at cleaning up our own catastrophes, especially when those catastrophes threaten to wipe us off the map entirely. As the Kronos cascade threatened to unravel reality itself, a team of humanity's brightest and, let's be honest, most unhinged scientists rallied for a last-ditch effort to save existence. Leading the charge was a now sober and much more terrified Dr. Xiao. Her solution: meet temporal chaos with even more temporal chaos. The plan was nothing short of audacious, bordering on suicidal. The exact kind of idea that makes other species look at humanity and mutter, "What are they thinking?" They intended to use the temporal resonance amplifier to create a controlled time loop, a stable bubble of spacetime that would trap the Kronos cascade and gradually unwind the damage. The only hitch? Someone had to pilot the contraption from the inside. That someone turned out to be Captain Marcus, Chrono, Chavez, a test pilot with more bravado than good sense and a smile that made everyone instinctively check their wallets. As he settled into a contraption that looked like a hybrid between a dentist's chair and a particle accelerator, Chrono flashed a thumbs up to the anxious group of scientists. "No worries, folks," he said, his grin never faltering. "I'll have this all sorted out in a jiffy." Time pun intended, and with that, they powered up the machine. What happened next was a light display that made the aurora borealis seem like a bargain bin Christmas decoration. Reality seemed to twist, stretch, and tear itself apart around the temporal resonance amplifier. For what felt like an eternity, or perhaps just a few minutes, time itself was in flux. The machine whirred, buzzed, and pulsed in ways that defied all reason. Across the galaxy, entire civilizations held their collective breath, waiting to see if humanity had just saved the universe or signed its death warrant. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The amplifier powered down with a faint, almost anticlimactic whir. For a moment, nothing. Silence. Then, the hatch creaked open, and Captain Chavez staggered out, looking like he'd aged 100 years while simultaneously getting younger. Did it work? Someone dared to ask. Chrono blinked, taking a moment to reorient himself before flashing that notorious grin. "Well," he drawled, "we're still here, so that's a good sign. And I'm pretty sure I just watched the heat death of the universe and the birth of the next one. So yeah, I'd say it worked." Incredibly, Chrono had done more than just stop the Chronos cascade. In navigating the time loop, he had gathered data that would fundamentally change humanity's understanding of time and space. Humanity hadn't just avoided disaster, they'd made a monumental leap forward in the field of temporal mechanics. The rest of the galaxy was, to put it mildly, floored. Words like stunned or shocked don't quite capture the reaction. Utterly gobsmacked is probably closer to the truth. Humanity had, in one fell swoop, nearly obliterated all of existence and then somehow achieved what was thought to be impossible, a stable manipulation of time itself. From that moment on, "Hold my beer" entered the galactic lexicon, becoming shorthand for attempting a mind-bogglingly reckless and impossible feat, and somehow succeeding through a mix of audacity, skill, and sheer dumb luck. As I wrapped up the story, I looked around at my alien audience. Their expressions ranged from wide-eyed disbelief to what could only be described as existential dread. The Zenthan, its skin a rapidly shifting kaleidoscope of colors, was the first to break the silence. "But that's it," it stammered, unable to process the story. "Impossible?" I offered with a grin. "Reckless? Completely batch?" "Yes," the Zenthan exclaimed, its voice trembling. "All of those things." I couldn't help but laugh. "Well, welcome to humanity, my friend, where the impossible is just another Tuesday. Reckless is part of the job description, and batch, well, that's practically a compliment." The Grix rustled its spiny needles thoughtfully. "I begin to understand why your species is both revered and feared. You are capable of unfathomable destruction, yet also extraordinary salvation, often in the same moment." I gave a playful wink. "It's a talent, occasionally a curse, but it does keep things exciting." The Mazzari twins were practically bouncing in their seats, their antennae twitching wildly with excitement. "Oh, but you must have more stories. What about the Great Sien Flea Circus incident, or the Arcturian Llama Rodeo disaster, or..." I held up a hand, laughing. "Whoa, slow down, you two. Even humans need sleep sometimes." I leaned in, smirking. "And besides, some of those stories are classified." The twins gasped, clearly enthralled by the prospect of even more absurd tales. The rest of the alien group still sat in stunned silence, likely trying to process everything they had just heard. As I drained the last of my synth beer and stood to leave, I could feel the eyes, or their equivalent, of the gathered aliens still on me, their curiosity piqued, their minds racing with the wild stories of human insanity and genius. "Don't worry," I said with a grin. "There's always more where that came from. Just remember, next time you think something's impossible, well, we humans don't really believe in that word." And with that, I left the bar, the echoes of incredulous murmurs and fascinated whispers trailing behind me. "Wouldn't want to start another intergalactic incident now, would we?" I said with a smirk, but before I could turn to leave, the Dracian Void Monk, who had been silent throughout the entire night, finally spoke. Its voice was like the faintest echo of starlight swirling at the event horizon of a black hole. "Your species," it said slowly, "is an enigma, contradiction. You defy the very principles that should limit you, and yet you flourish. You bend the laws of the universe, and the universe adapts. It is most intriguing." I raised my empty glass in a mock toast. "To humanity," I said with a grin, "breaking the universe and piecing it back together since, well, apparently before time even mattered." A chorus of confused but enthusiastic toasts rippled through the group. Tentacles, claws, eyebrows, fronds, and various other appendages raised in unison. I couldn't help but laugh as I looked around. Sure, humans were the galaxy's wild card, the ones who stared the impossible in the face and said, sure, why not? The ones willing to risk everything on a dare, a bet, or just to see how far we could push the envelope. But you know what? Someone's got to do it. Someone's got to explore the unknown, break the rules, and take on the universe headfirst. If it had to be us, well, I wouldn't have it any other way. As the drinks flowed and the night stretched on, the tales kept coming. The Great Andromedan Cheese Heist, a bizarre saga involving a stolen gravity manipulator, 17 tons of artisanal cheddar, and a black hole that, let's just say, got a little too involved. The Alpha Centauri karaoke incident that taught the galaxy why antimatter and drunken sing-alongs should never, ever mix. And of course, the infamous Zeta Reticuli noodle disaster. Turns out synthetic spaghetti isn't nearly as fun as it sounds when it decides to replicate uncontrollably. With every story, I could see the growing mix of horror, admiration, and bemused affection in my alien audience's expressions, or whatever passed for expressions in their various species. That's when it hit me. This right here was humanity's real superpower. It wasn't just our toughness, creativity, or adaptability. No, our real strength was the ability to make the entire galaxy throw up its collective hands or tentacles and say, fine, go ahead. Just try not to break too many laws of physics this time. And honestly, I was proud of that. As the artificial dawn crept into the grimy spaceport bar, I stretched and yawned, feeling the weight of the night's stories catching up to me. All right, folks, I said, stifling another yawn. It's been a blast, but this human needs some shut-eye before my next shift. The crowd murmured their farewells, still digesting both the tales and the alcohol. Just as I turned to go, the Xanthan called out, wait, one last question, if you will. I turned back, raising an eyebrow. Go on. Its skin rippled with curiosity, shifting through shades of purple and green. These stories, these incredible feats, they can't all be true, can they? Surely some of it is, well, it hesitated, exaggerated, total bullshit. I offered, grinning. The Xanthan's skin flushed a deep indigo. Yes, exactly that, I chuckled, shaking my head. Ah, my friend, that's the best part of being human. Even we don't always know where the truth ends and the bullshit begins. But you know what? What? The Xanthan asked, all four eyes wide and curious. I winked. That's half the fun. Keep em guessing, I say. Makes life more interesting. With that, I sauntered out of the bar, leaving behind a bewildered yet entertained group of aliens who were now both more enlightened and more confused about humanity than ever before. As I made my way back to my quarters, I couldn't help but grin. Another night, another bar, another round of spreading the legend of humanity's ridiculous but brilliant problem-solving across the stars. Because at the end of the day, someone's got to keep the universe on its toes. And if that someone has to be us crazy humans, well, I think we're up for the challenge. What's the worst that could happen? On second thought, don't answer that. We'll find out soon enough. And when we do, well, hold my beer.